Andrew was one of the two founders of Psychotherapists and Counselors for Social Responsibility, and also the International Jungian Group Analysis and Activism. He's a relational Jungian psychoanalyst, professor, author, activist, and political consultant. Books include The Political Psyche and Politics on the Couch, the winner of Grev Diva Award. Last year, he published Reflecting Critically on the Political Psyche, Therapy, Testament, and Trouble in Psychoanalysis and Jungian Analysis. And there was a reissue with the new introduction of The Father. A selection of videos may be found on his website, www.andrewsamuels.com, which I am about to also put in the chat for everyone. Welcome, Andrew.
I'm probably not the only one who needs a pause to breathe, but we are limited to 10 minutes. So, depth psychology and politics. It isn't new and it isn't working. The reason why it isn't working includes the arrogance of the depth psychologists who try to do it alone. We need alliances. What I called in the political psyche in 1993, we need a resacralization of politics. That means fashioning alliances with, for example, people working in the climate crisis area, feminism, people working with economic inequality in all its many ways, people involved in sexual diversity, including trans activists, and of course, all the therapies. You know, Kathleen, you're right. It's a good idea to have psychotherapists on all these commissions and committees. My slogan for a long time has been a psychotherapist on every committee, but for fuck's sake, not a committee of psychotherapists. I'm going to talk about three themes. The titles are, number one, cleaning up our act. Number two, the value and virtue of one-sidedness. And number three, getting out of the Western box. Cleaning up our act. We've got to distance ourselves from Jung's politics, whether it's his anti-Semitism, his racism, and his elitism, particularly his economic elitism. I'm awfully amused by what he wrote in a letter to a young man in the 1930s, in which he said, when conditions get better, this is the height of hyperinflation in Germany, when conditions get better, the people get worse. That's okay if you're sitting there in Kuznacht. Psychoanalysis also has not got a great record. I've been reading quite a lot lately about the way in which psychoanalysis abandoned its Jewish members in 1930s Germany. I don't know who here has heard of the deal with the devil made with the Nazified psychotherapy institution made by Ernest Jones and Anna Freud. In terms of cleaning up our profession, cleaning up our act, we need to pay a lot more attention to the politics and economics of our profession. Who gets analysis and therapy? Who gets to give analysis and therapy? And in that exploration, we are going to have to come up against racial prejudice and socioeconomic factors. That's the cleaning up our act in 90 seconds. The value and virtue of being one-sided. I agree with Heba. Neutrality is evil. There's a lot of discussion about neutrality in psychoanalysis right now because, of course, as ever, they find that James Strachey translated a word from German to English and made a balls up of it. Indifference is not neutrality. Now, the problem with neutrality is that it lends itself to the idealization of deep reflection. This is where I dialogue with Tom. Deep reflection is very seductive. But as John Beebe from San Francisco said, after I had been talking about my own superficiality at the IAP Congress back in August, he said, yeah, you can have too much Tao. And I think that's a really interesting and neat way. And then when you're talking about reflection and depth and Tao, I ask, cui bono, as Cicero did, who benefits from talking about complexity? Okay, take the Middle East, take the Israel-Palestine situation. Oh, it is so complex. Who benefits from pushing all the time how complex it is? I'm not saying it's simple. The opposite of complexity isn't simplicity. But I am saying we're supposed to think about what lies behind things. Too much talk of complexity basically benefits Israel and the West. With regard to theory, I want to say a few things about it. Look, I am a very good theoretician, Tom. I know how to do it. I just don't respect it anymore because I have damaged people with my theories. I'm not saying you have, but I would ask you to consider the possibility that theory is, in fact, potentially dangerous. And I'll tell you why. When I knock around with depth psychologists and therapists who are into politics, do you know what I notice? They really want to be right. What they care about is not peace or justice or anything like that. They care about the depressive position being important, or the transcendent bloody function being important, or the complex, cultural complex theory being important. Now look, I do it too. I also want my ideas to triumph in the marketplace of theory, but I don't only want to do that. So be careful with this desire to get it right. The best kind of psychological approach to politics revolves around failure. And I don't have time to talk about it. I've written so much about failure as a mode of leadership. With regard to depth reflection, I've written something called an action ethos. This is very hard for shrinks, really is. Because what it's doing is saying being is not always better or deeper or more important than doing. You know, reflection is dangerous and you can lose the name of action, as Hamlet said and did. Last point. Activism is a value. It's not acting out, it's not manic, it's the deepest value. In the book of values for the IAP that Murray Stein edited, Murray Stein and Amelia Keel edited, I think, you'll see a chapter by me on, which is entitled, in my own always trying to be self-critical way, is activism a value? Well, I think it is, but I'm not sure. But I'd like to see some proper discussion of it. Third and final segment. I do like a 10-minute limitation because it gives you license to rant. Because if you don't rant, you won't communicate. And if you don't communicate, all the beautiful theory in the world is a complete wank, really. Wank is a British word for masturbate. So, getting out of the Western box. Well, the short answer is you can't. Of course you can't. We've all grown up in it, except for those of us who haven't. We need to try. Those of us who did grow up in the Western box need to try to get out of it without idealizing the other, especially the Southern other, because the southern other is not perfect. Nevertheless, what the southern other is not the West. What I'm on about is the necessity of challenging, above all, America, as well as other Western imperialisms like the British, but in our time, and it's difficult for me because I grew up in a very American-philic household because of my father's war experiences, which were very positive. There is an absolutely fundamental need at the moment to challenge the United States of America. In part, for doing that, we have to look at the economic advantages of Western wars in general and American wars in particular, and the way in which they both draw upon and fuel economic inequality. So, what do we do? Where do we turn? I say, don't look up to the skies of hope and optimism. I say, look down. And believe it or not, I am a Jungian still, just alchemy took the basest of elements and made something important and wonderful and transformative out of them. We need to connect with fracture, with failure, with insanity. George Orwell in 1984 said many, many things. But one of the things he said that I could imagine on my gravestone, if there is hope, it lies in the proles. Proles means the proletariat, the downtrodden, the lumpen proletariat that the Marxists didn't even want because they were incapable of participating in a revolution. If there's hope, it lies in the proles. As an extension of that, I'm going to end with a quote from Leonardo Boff, the great liberation theologian, who incredibly and wonderfully was made an honorary member of the IAAP in 2013. One of the best things we ever did. Boff said, God is in the poor who cry out, and God is the one who listens to the cry and liberates so that the poor no longer need to cry out. Thanks very much.